Of all the legends of the Wild West, the violence that surrounded 1880's Tombstone, Arizona might be the most famous. The last great boomtown of the West, the lawlessness that surrounded the silver mining town of Tombstone included some of the most famous characters in the Wild West, like the Earp brothers and their most famous rivals, the Clanton gang. But it might not be Ike and Billy who participated in the famous gunfight at the OK Corral who are the most interesting and enigmatic of the Clantons, because the patriarch of the Clanton clan, Newman Haynes Old Man Clanton, might have been the leader of that gang of outlaws called the Cochise County Cowboys, which included famous gunmen like Tom and Frank McClowry, Curly Bill Brocious, and Johnny Ringo. Like so many characters of the West, what we know about Old Man Clanton mixes a healthy dose of legend with just a few known facts that create a history that deserves to be remembered. Newman Haynes Clanton was born in Tennessee in 1816. In 1840, he married Maria Kelso, with whom he had 7 children, 5 sons and 2 daughters. The family moved around the West, from Tennessee to Missouri, then to California to search for gold, and then to Texas, where during the Civil War, he and his oldest son, John Wesley, served in the Confederate Home Guard. Some accounts claim that Newman was released on account of his age, although other accounts claim that both he and John Wesley eventually deserted. After the war, he moved the family again, this time to Arizona, and then back to California, where his wife Maria passed away. There's disagreement about whether the Clantons were troublemakers or good citizens. Many in the Wild West were a mix of both. By some accounts, they had to leave California following a dispute, essentially being ridden out of town. By 1873, Newman, then usually called Old Man Clanton, had moved back to Arizona, and most of his family followed him there. They were involved in ranching and various businesses, but finally found success when, in 1877, silver was discovered in what was then Pima County of the Arizona Territory, leading to the foundation of the town of Tombstone. Mines near the town produced tens of millions of dollars in silver ore in the 1880s, and the town population grew from 100 to 14,000 in just 7 years. The Clanton Ranch was well placed to provide cattle to feed the growing population. It was a large and successful operation. In 1881, son Ike claimed to have raised or purchased some 700 cattle in a single year. But there's a problem with the story. Newman Clanton never appears to have registered a brand in Pima or Cochise counties in Arizona, which would have been required to legally raise cattle. And that leads many historians to conclude that the Clantons mostly sold stolen cattle. At the time, Mexico charged tariffs to carry goods across the border, creating an incentive for smuggling. Smugglers used a pass from Mexico to Arizona, cryptically called Skeleton Canyon. The cattle the Clantons were selling likely came from Mexico. It is possible that they were purchased from Mexicans who smuggled the cattle in to avoid the tariffs. However, it is also quite possible the cattle were stolen. Movies about Tombstone and the Earps tend to imply that the gang, called the Cowboys, were a formal organization of criminals. It's not quite the case. The group was more of a loosely organized band of acquaintances. The Cowboys worked as ranch hands, but some were involved in crimes, such as stage robbery, while others appear to have engaged in cattle rustling. Several of the Cowboys, such as the McClowry brothers, Tom and Frank, were associated with the Clantons, working as cowhands on the Clanton Ranch. At the time, the term cowboy didn't have the same meaning that it does today. People who drove cattle were usually called cowhands or drovers. In Cochise County, Arizona, the term cowboy was synonymous with cattle rustling. In 1881, the newspaper The Tombstone Epitaph described them as thieves and cutthroats who take pride in announcing to the public that they are rustlers. Various members of the Cowboys made raids into Mexico, robbing and stealing livestock, and occasionally killing Mexican citizens. Almost certainly the Clantons procured some of this livestock, although it's not known whether they were merely purchasing from the Cowboys or whether the Clantons themselves were participating in the raids. In July of 1879, a particularly violent raid in which several men were killed drew the attention of the Mexican Rurales, the Mexican Rural Constabulary Force. The Rurales followed the trail of the murderers, illegally crossing into the U.S., where they had no authority. As the large group of Rurales reached Skeleton Canyon, they were ambushed by men hiding in the rocks. Several of the Rurales were killed, some reportedly by execution, and only a few escaped. The Mexican government filed a complaint with U.S. President Chester Arthur, but no one was ever charged with the killing. Later, a man named John Peters Ringo claimed to have been at the ambush, and that claimed, among others, that Old Man Clanton and 2 of his sons, Ike and Billy, had participated in the murders, along with the McClowry brothers. Ringo, better known as Johnny Ringo, had been involved in what was called the Mason County War in Texas, a series of lynchings and retribution killings over cattle rustling, and was wanted for murder there. He was a known associate of the Cowboys, and if he is to be believed regarding the Clantons' participation in the 1879 Skeleton Canyon Massacre, that suggests that they were involved in the cattle rustling in Mexico, although again, they may have simply been the buyers of the stolen cattle. Another of the Cowboys that Johnny Ringo said had participated in the massacre was William Brocious, better known as Curly Bill. A known rustler, Curly Bill was a crack pistol shot, able to hit a jackrabbit on the run. Some sources claim that Curly Bill may have participated in the Lincoln County War in New Mexico, and at one point had been in the same gang as William Bonney, better known as Billy the Kid. By other accounts, Curly Bill was wanted for murder for a killing in El Paso, Texas. Curly Bill had a mean sense of humor, and it was reported in the newspaper that he had once fired at the feet of a preacher, forcing him to dance while he preached. In 1881, Curly Bill had been accused of the murder of Tombstone Town Marshal Fred Wyatt and had been arrested by Wyatt Earp, then the undersheriff for Pima County, although at trial the shooting was ruled accidental. In July 1881, Curly Bill had, reportedly, found out that a group of Mexican smugglers was bringing a large load of silver into the United States. As the smugglers moved through Skeleton Canyon, Bill and a group of cowboys, again said to include Newman, Ike, and Bill Clanton, as well as the McClowry brothers and Johnny Ringo, ambushed them. 6 were killed in the ambush, and the remaining were hunted down and executed. You can certainly see how Skeleton Canyon got its name. Later, Skeleton Canyon would have another claim to fame when in 1886 the Apache chief Geronimo surrendered in Skeleton Canyon to General Nelson Miles. The 1881 Skeleton Canyon Massacre led to speculation about a lost treasure. The story claims that so many of the smugglers' mules had been killed that the cowboys who ambushed them could not carry all the silver. After splitting the silver, they buried it. But either because the silver was moved in various attempts to double-cross each other, or because some of the cowboys were killed before they could retrieve the treasure, silver was said to be left behind. Most historians discount the rumor, as there were no reported robberies in Mexico at the time that would explain a large treasure, and the ambushers were assumed to have made off with a small take that was likely spent in the saloons of Tombstone. But once again, no one was charged with the killings, and it was not, as it turns out, the last massacre. The following August, a group of 16 Mexicans was attacked in Mexico by what was described as 25 cowboys. Several were killed, and the cattle they were herding, reportedly cattle they were retrieving from rustlers, were taken. A posse from the Mexican town of Bavispe rode out, intent on vengeance. In the morning, they happened upon a group of 7 men herding cattle in Guadalupe Pass in the boot heel of New Mexico, near both the Mexican and Arizona border. Assuming these to be the rustlers, the posse attacked from ambush as the group was rising for breakfast. 5 of the men were killed. 2 more escaped despite being wounded. 1 is reported by the Tombstone Nugget by playing dead. Among those killed was Newman Haynes Clanton. He was apparently cooking breakfast for the crew, and when shot, his body fell into the cook fire. As with so much in the Wild West, there are various stories that conflict. The most common account says that the cowboys killed, including Old Man Clanton, were indeed the rustlers, and that the posse included survivors of the 1879 Skeleton Canyon Massacre, and thus revenge was also a motive. Later, rumors spread that the killers were not Mexicans, but the Earps, conducting extrajudicial killings, although there is scant evidence of such. And the survivors seem to have agreed that the attackers were Mexican. More difficult to discern is whether the men attacked were the actual men who had committed the murders in Mexico. Only one, a man named James Crane, was a suspected outlaw. The reports in Mexico were a group of 25 men, while only 7 were at the camp. It is entirely possible that the men, including Old Man Clanton, were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or possibly, once again, their role had been to buy the stolen cattle, and they may not have participated in the actual raid. Just 2 months after the death of Old Man Clanton, Ike and Billy Clanton were involved in the famous gunfight at the OK Corral against Wyatt Virgil and Morgan Earp and James Henry Doc Holliday. Billy Clanton was killed in the gunfight, along with Tom and Frank McClowry. The Earp brothers claimed that the gunfight occurred as they were trying to enforce a city ordinance against carrying firearms in town, but Ike Clanton claimed that the Earps were committing murder in order to cover up their participation in a stagecoach robbery. In trial, the Earps were acquitted, as Ike Clanton's story had a lot of inconsistencies. At the time of his death, Billy Clanton was just 19 years old. The gunfight resulted in revenge attacks on the Earps, with Town Marshal Virgil wounded, losing the use of his arm, and Morgan Earp killed, shot in the back while playing pool. Although no one was formally convicted of the crimes, Wyatt Earp took a posse that included 2 other Earp brothers, James and Warren, in search of the killers, and the so-called Earp vendetta ride concluded with the death of Curly Bill, shot with a shotgun by Wyatt in a shootout in March 1882. The following July, Johnny Ringo's body was found with a single bullet wound to the temple. The coroner's inquest ruled the death to be suicide, although there have long been rumors that he was killed by either Wyatt Earp or Doc Holliday. In 1887, Ike and his brother Phineas, or Finn Clanton, were charged with cattle rustling. They were surrounded by a posse. Finn gave up without a fight, but Ike tried to draw a rifle and was shot to death by a detective that had been hired by local cattle ranchers. Finn served time in jail for rustling and had another couple of brushes with the law, died of an accident in 1906. The oldest brother, John Wesley, never relocated to Arizona. He stayed in California. He died of natural causes in 1916. Of all of them, the most interesting might have been Old Man Clanton. Clearly he associated with outlaws, and he almost certainly sold stolen cattle, but the extent of his participation in their crimes is still really unknown. Some claim that he was the ruthless leader of the Cochise County Cowboys and was replaced by Curly Bill after his death. Whether he was just a man trying to make a living on the edge of the law, or whether he was central to the robbery, rustling, and murder committed by the Cochise County Cowboys is still a matter of dispute in a life that is more defined by legend than known fact. Originally buried in New Mexico, in 1882, Ike and Finn moved Old Man Clanton's body to Tombstone, where it is buried on Boot Hill, next to the grave of his son Billy. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.